Okay, so we're going to continue with our last item before the break for lunch. And we're going to have a roundtable discussion led by Sarah and Alysha about women in metal. And I'm extremely excited about this roundtable. I don't know how many of you were already 2 summers ago at the South of Heaven Symposium after the screening of Global Metal. We had a Q&A with Sam Dunn, and one of the questions he was asked was about women in metal, and he didn't really have an answer for her. He gave sort of kind of a very, well, not, you know, there are some great women in metal. I mean, you mentioned Arch Enemy and stuff like that, but it wasn't really an answer or a discussion about, and in a way, I mean, and I'm not, you know, putting him on the spot, it was clear that it's something that he hadn't really thought about and had an answer for. Since then, we've been here at UVic, at UVic, trying to sort of think more about this. We brought Lena Dawes to talk about her book, which actually isn't just about women in metal, but also the intersection of race and women in metal. So, we're continuing this discussion, and I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
Cool. Thanks for being here. This is awesome. So I'm Dr. Sarah Sutler Cohen. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, where I grew up, although I lived across the water in Seattle for 6 years, and that was a while ago. Anyway, and I teach at San Francisco State University in the College of Ethnic Studies in the American Indian Studies Department. I'm a sociologist by trade, and you'll hear more about me at my keynote. And Alysha, which I think you guys all know her, and so Alysha had approached me about doing a roundtable panel of some sort looking at women in metal, and we kind of batted back and forth like 150 ideas. Yeah. And we decided, actually, I think it was her idea, it was your idea, to look at images of women on metal album covers. And I got all sorts of excited and we're cool, and I found the two of us kind of went through and found like a bunch of covers with women on them. And then Alysha came up with some really cool categories about, you know, how they're depicted. So are they victims? Are they part of a fantasy world? You know, kind of this sort of thing. And some of my other work I'm also working on some research around the woman's body in metal, both as fan, as performer, and as accoutrement, and also as part of the landscape in terms of what the bodies are doing. One of the things that I'm interested in as a sociologist is textual analysis, and so I'll be kind of quick as I go through these because there's a lot, but just sort of pay attention to the gaze. So what is the gaze looking at in terms of the body? So that means your gaze at the material or at the art, and also look at the gaze of the women. And some in the last slide is a Wasp album, and there's actually no face at all, just a body. And you'll see that. It's Wasp. We love Wasp. So you know, you see this weird, like, superimposed, like, dead piglets at her nipples, and she's prone, physically sitting prone, but she's also not looking at you. She's not acknowledging the people that are looking at her. And so there's this sort of victim perspective, but there's also, like, she might have slaughtered these pigs because her hand is bloody. And it's Black Tusk, who is not a band that is misogynist in terms of their lyrics. They're a band I actually really like. So that's, there's one. The album, the debut album of Black Sabbath, and we have a woman here. And of course, we all know, if you don't know, you should know, she's a witch. Have you guys seen the Abbott memes?
Yes.
So there's one for this, and it's Black Abbott, and it's a back, right? So like, it's awesome. I have like a little obsession with these memes. I collect them all the time, so I have like a whole folder on my computer.
There's a good Facebook page. It's like any picture can be improved by adding a mortal to it.
Oh, I could have made that page. Have you seen the baseball one? That one's great. But this one is interesting because she's superimposed into the landscape. So this would be sort of an example of kind of the figure in the landscape. And there's not a whole lot of indication that it's a woman, actually. She's got some feminine qualities, but that's a kind of cultural perspective about what a woman is supposed to look like too, so it's questionable. We know it's a woman, it's a witch, because we know the narrative of the album, because we're all fans. Every single one of us has this vinyl album.
That's, yeah, it looks like Ozzy.
Right,
It's the same.
It's a witch. It does kind of look like Ozzy. We won't talk about his housewife years, right? Okay, so Burzum is Burzum. That's how much I like to talk about Burzum. Okay, so Dragon Force. You mentioned power metal, one of my absolute favorite genres of metal. I have no shame when it comes to it. I am right at the front at Sabaton. I left halfway through Amon Amarth. Sorry, I like Amon Amarth, but I'm like a huge Sabaton fan. It probably makes no sense. It makes less sense than it should that I'm like so obsessed with Sabaton, but there it is. So Dragon Force, who I also really like, and you have this kind of like sci-fi fantasy world of metal, which I love it. I mean, I grew up in the 70s, so I like grew up with comic books and Thor, and I love it. When it started happening, I was like, yeah, this is great. I'm totally behind it. So it's interesting because, and there is some sense of power, but there's a hypersexualization of that as well.
It's the Frank Frazetta kind of.
Right, absolutely, right, which is questionable in its power, because the assumption that, a lot of sort of like backlash to feminism has been, well, women have power because they have sexuality and they can control men with their sex. Like, okay, well, what kind of power is that? Do you have to like go to bed with people to have power over them? No thanks. So it's an interesting, fantasy and women is always an interesting dichotomy in terms of like sexuality and power. Is it really power? Is she threatening because she's going to come make out with you and she's super hot, or is she threatening because she's going to take over your village? It's confusing. Another favorite of mine, Electric Wizard. I'm in love with this band as well. Everything that Electric Wizard does has some, satanic aspect to it. So witch cult today, of course, the lyrics, right? Or the Dunwich album. So it has some sort of occult phenomenon, and a couple of people have mentioned that that there is definitely like the sort of the religiosity of metal is present. What's really interesting here today, like I don't know where your gaze goes, but mine goes to the giant nipple. So I don't know, so maybe yours goes to the face, and you're like, oh, there's a woman there. Right, come on now. So, but she's prone, and there's power, and of course the images that she's being offered up in sacrifice. So there's sort of a where does your gaze go image. Well, you're like a media person, right? So the idea is to go to the center of the page, right?
I was looking at the eye the entire time.
Is there an eye?
Well, it was
Just kidding. That could be anything. Currently looking for this. I love Reverend Bazaar. So this is another one. Another play on the idea of power and hypersexualization of women and rape. And of course, it's Electric Wizard and Reverend Bazaar, and there's a cross, and so you also know that there's some occult stuff going on here. Another Electric Wizard. This was a alternate cover for Black Masses. So the witch, the power, but she's half naked, and so I always question that idea around power in women. How powerful can women be if they're half naked? Like, I don't know if you guys have ever been in a fist fight before. Or have gone in the pit. Imagine doing it naked. There's not a whole lot of power you can wield. There you can take people to bed. Right, okay. So Halloween. This is their best of anniversary cover, and again, just kind of looking at her gaze. She's totally disengaged with the audience that is looking at her, and the cello was an interesting choice for Halloween. Okay, Huntress. Love Huntress. I have a friend who's a DJ in Calgary, and we argue all the time about Huntress. She can't stand them. And I always make her play. So what do you want me to play for you? Huntress. If you are familiar with Huntress, their music is all occultism stuff. And so this one's Spell Eater. She's got another one about, she's got a song called Eight of Swords, which is a reference to a tarot deck. And she is on the cover of the album. So some image of her, there's women as well as her. She really uses her body in a lot of, in the videos. She's very beautiful and busty and thin, and there's been a lot of criticism about that, which I find interesting. So, you know, you can't win for trying. There she is again, and some women in the background, Starbound Beast, and this is all about power. And although she's extremely beautiful and sexy, she's also covered up. So that's an interesting thing to think about when we're looking at the various images and the gaze. And while this is a good thing to note, just because even though she is not engaged with you, looking at her, she is fully engaged in what she's doing. So she's engaged in ritual. She's engaged in ceremony. And that's a little bit of a departure than being prone and a victim and with sort of like dead eyes off the camera or off the piece and not looking at you. So she is fully engaged. She just doesn't care that you're looking at her.
I've seen them live, and it seemed her entire gimmick was that she had breasts.
Maybe that would be, we could save that for like after we're done talking. Okay, so here's Impaled. These are dear friends of mine. And a couple of whom also are in Ghoul. Maybe you guys know this. So just as an interesting, the thing that's hanging out of her mouth is one of those gross, like, wormfish things. I forget what they're called. Yeah, of course. I can't remember what they're called. It's like an urchin. Anyway, so obviously this person is dead. And Impaled is an interesting band, right? Because they play a lot with the body in terms of varying positions of slaughter. And they remain indiscriminate between the male and the female body. So it's an interesting thing to talk about. I think you can't isolate one album and say, oh, it's a woman who's been bound and gagged and raped, without talking about the rest of Impaled's work, including their videos. So I have a few of Iron Maiden here. They have fun stuff with women. There's Margaret Thatcher on the ground. Obviously a political movement perspective there. Eddie always in the background, the Twilight Zone, and sort of having a nightmare with Eddie in the background. Although I don't know if Eddie showed up behind me, I'd be like, excited. Dude, you're here. Okay, you're real. I knew it. Here's another women in uniform, and so like a lot of metal bands, war is talked about a lot. So this is actually sort of like a soldier, or maybe she's a marm, and these are girls home from boarding school, and Eddie's getting down with them. Scorpions. The Scorpions. I love the Scorpions, but God damn it, I get so mad. I mean, come on. She's down on her knees, like, the dog's not even sitting, right? The dog's standing. Or is the dog sitting? Can't tell. Can't tell if the dog's sitting. But obviously the two of them are bowing to the master. And there's that. And so he's got some, he's drinking a beer, he's got his hand in his pocket. So that sort of indicates a kind of casual, nonchalant, yeah, whatever, you're here. You're here. Yeah, of course, you're exactly where you need to be. And she's waiting for direction. It's just, there's so much wrong with it. I can't even. Love Drive, my favorite Scorpions album ever. I love this album. I hate this album cover. It drives me nuts. And what's interesting is if you've ever seen, there's actually two shots. This is the cover, but then if you open it up, there's a second shot, and it's kind of like a blooper where she's laughing, and it's like, oh, ha, ha, and it's troubling because of, I think, the way that women are made to believe or are convinced or something, or the message is like, yeah, I'm in on this, right? So just imagine how that might, it's gross. It's gross. Like, how many people had to chew that much gum to stick to you? I mean, it's just disgusting, right? So I mean, it's gross. It has nothing to do with Love Drive. I don't get it. I think it's an attempt at abstract art. I'm not sure. But again, it's like Scorpions. Oh, frustrating. But the second image, which I didn't get on here, second image is interesting because it does indicate that she's in on the joke, on her, which is troubling. I will never forgive myself for somehow getting rid of this or losing this album. I actually had it. So Virgin Killer, who knows? Who's never seen this? Okay, so this is the original album art for Virgin Killer. And that's what happened to Virgin Killer. Very quickly. And so I wanted to and I was putting this together. I remembered the film Spinal Tap, who sort of parodied this whole thing with their "Smell the Glove." And in Spinal Tap, I'm going to end this with just a very short, tiny clip of this, and then Alysha's going to take over. So this is in Spinal Tap. Who's never even heard of Spinal Tap before? That makes me very happy. Okay, so in Spinal Tap, it's a parody. They're directly messing around with this, absolutely, with this sort of thematic of the victim and in sort of response to, well, Virgin Killer, people freaked out, obviously, and then the answer that was, or the response that the record company does without Spinal Tap's consent is this. And then Nigel Tufnell's infamous, well, it's black. Yes, it's black. It's heavy metal. Well, it's none more black, is it? Right? So that's the None More Black album. This band is from Louisville, Kentucky, and Adam Neal of the Hookers uses images of women in various sundry positions on all the albums. But he's also kind of a comic book guy, and into fantasy and this sort of thing. And so it's interesting if you talk about gays again. What are they doing? They're looking at each other. They're engaged with the ritual. And these two, Satan's Highway, great album. They're also not looking at you, but they're also kind of like don't care that you're looking at them, which is just an interesting. Definitely not victims, but they're all tits and ass. Here's the Sword. They use images of women, very sort of Alphonse Mucha-esque. She is thinking, which is a departure from a lot of images of women and metal albums, in her pose here. Here's another one where she's actually blindfolded, but you see that there's also some remnants of a tarot card here for the Sword, and a little bit almost indicative of some ritual going on. And then the same here with Freya, which is kind of a throwback a little bit to fantasy, and she's of course completely covered. And we'll end with Wasp. and so you only actually have a piece of woman. So this woman is actually cut off in half and displayed. We don't know I got nothing. No idea. So I just wanted to kind of go through these slides, and then I just want to show. So let's take a second here.
Because a greased, naked woman on all fours with a dog collar around her neck and a leash and pushing a black glove in her face to sniff it. You don't find that offensive?
No,
you don't find that sexist?
Well, you should have seen the cover they wanted to do.
Okay, so all right, so that was kind of, I just wanted to start us off with that, and maybe and leave you with that comment to have Alysha take over, and I'll put this back up, and then I'm just going to put this on a loop.
Okay, so hi, I'm Alysha. I'm just going to tell you a bit about myself, so my first point makes sense from where I'm coming from. Fourth year commerce student doing a dual specialization in entrepreneurship and international business. So what I like learning about most is small business marketing to open markets around the world, which made me think of course, marketers using women in commercials like dehumanization in order to sell back to them. So what do you think is the point of putting these images of women on the album covers as a marketing standpoint? Like, what emotion do you think they're trying to evoke from metal fantasists yourself? Do you think it's like, oh yay, naked ladies, like I want to buy that, like I'm like a white dude, like North America, I like naked ladies, or is it sort of like, and you think it's something different?
think it depends on the instance. Like the two main ones I see is I'm a white dude and like movies, and the other one is like a very kind of occult witchcraft kind of sense. It's trying to market towards this esotericism that is in heavy metal. So I mean, sometimes those blend together, but I think it's one of those two. Like you look at a lot of power metal covers with the Frank Frazetta style chainmail bikini kind of deal, and it's very obvious where that's going. And you look at a lot of these, like, you know, like the Black Sabbath album cover. It's not sexualized in any way. It's almost androgynous to the point where half of us think it's Ozzy Osbourne, and it's just kind of there to install this creepy, you know, occult image in our head. Yeah.
So do you think, what role do you think women plays in the like weird occult niche though? Because you could have easily just like did like some guy, right?
And I mean, there are album covers where they do have occult looking warlocks and people with goat heads like that. But you know, why they chose a woman on the cover of Black Sabbath and not Ozzy Osbourne, I have no idea. But it's, you know, the ones that are very sexualized, very, you know, you can see what they're doing. Whereas with the occult ones, I think it's slightly less about sexuality, more just about making it look creepy, cool, you know, demony, summoning things.
I was just thinking parallel to this one, speaking particularly to marketing, is the fact that in virtually every case of a female-fronted band, and that's probably, if I look at my metal collection, where the women on the cover are, it's mostly those female-fronted bands, and it's that woman on the cover. And that definitely speaks to the marketing, but it's less so in some cases the sexuality, although there's an implication of it, because you're supposed to like the band because of that woman, and that's what's being presented. But it's not often overtly sexual in the way they're presented on the cover. So there's this sort of, it's an implication rather than the overtness of some of this, but it's still there.
Dora Pesh talks about that in Sam Dunn's The Headbanger's Journey, where she's like, where they wanted me to, you know, be more scantily clad. Just like, no, that's not me. That's not who I am. And Girls' Schools talked about that before too. And the assumption that that Jill Janis is all boobs on stage, is that your engagement with Jill Janis on stage, or is that in Jill Janis's intent? So what, you know, the whole, I mean, it's complicated because, you know, on the one hand, women are taking issue with representation of hypersexuality on stage, but then at the other hand, they're often blasted and then brought up, well, you know, Jill Janis is all, right. You know, what about Jill Janis? Well, what about Jill Janis?
But in her case, she was a Playboy model, so it's sort of part of her identity.
Yes, but what I still would trouble that was sort of like, so what?
Yeah.
Right? Because then we get into the idea of like women's sexual agency. So women have sexual agency, and women are involved in Playboy and pornography and this sort of thing. And there's an implication that's an excuse for how the band's success, right? Which, you know, so nobody's talking about her talent as a songwriter and songstress either, right? So I don't know. I think that there's complexities around this.
Yeah. Well, I would say I'm the only person I know who's a fan of Huntress. Everybody else I do are
me and you
definitely detractors, and it's mostly because they say, you know, she's using her sexuality, right. But the band itself is mediocre, so it must be
right.
That's what's
because
selling it.
Poison didn't use their sexuality at all, right?
Poison is just as bad as Huntress. They're both crap.
I don't know. I like Dee Snider talking about it in The Headbanger's Journey, where he's like, someone has to look at the guys on stage just like women, and with guys in the audience staring at their crotches and, you know, pumping their fists at it. But it's never black and white, right? Like, the complexities are always interesting.
Speaking on the sort of connection between occult imagery and women's sort of prevalence in it. I think it kind of speaks to historical conceptions of the relationship between women and witchcraft. For example, why an actual witch hunt where women singled out and more focused on, right? And I think that although it's a very complicated historical phenomenon, throughout history across many different cultures, actually you can find reoccurring views of women as sort of having more capability for evil and moral sort of, going off of morality, like even going back to the story of Adam and Eve being the great corrupter, right? So I think, there's probably still a vein of that in our culture. And, when you see, and we call it witchcraft, right? We don't call it wizardcraft.
Warlock craft. That's a great point, yeah.
This might be going off on a tangent, and it's kind of just thoughts that I'm beginning to think of based on your presentation. Thinking specifically about the occult element and the marketing of the cult, that I feel that it's a certain fantasy of empowerment, not in the sense that if I buy this Black Sabbath album or Electric Wizard album and I listen to it, I'll be able to do magic, but it's a certain fantasy of control and power that comes with the fantasy of magic. And I think the album covers kind of accentuate that power position and the fantasy of power with having these women in the occult scene. Not so much about sexuality, but about empowering white males. But I don't want to say that it's but I think that's one aspect of what's being sold is not so much sexuality as power.
Yeah. And with Cannibal Corpse is a really good example. And this is literally such a tiny example of women in album covers. I had to stop for time. Because I got to Cannibal Corpse, I'm like, I just have to, because I would have just kept going and going. But yeah, I think that there's definitely, like when black metal came out, people were terrified of it, and the part of the draw to metal, especially like when black metal hit, like the album black metal, not the genre, like I think definitely people were buying it for, put it out, like you have it in your room so everybody that comes over knows you had the Venom album, right? That's definitely part of it. And that's in The Gate, the film The Gate. Great horror film, love this movie. The central piece in that film is all about sort of this kid who has this metal album who does this ritual based on this band, which is a metal, and it's like 1986 or something like that. Totally recommend it. It's an awesome movie. But that's exactly what they're doing in that movie, right?
One thing I've noticed, talking about like the witch hunts there, being in medieval studies, I've looked at several documents talking about church inquisition, not necessarily for witchcraft, but it includes a lot of heresy in it, that the kind of focus on persecuting women is a relatively modern thing. There's a lot of documents in the Middle Ages that, like these church inquisitions kept pretty good records, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of like bias against women. Like if you look at one document, there might be more women that were interrogated or whatever, but it's pretty 50-50. And it could be any Joe Schmuck off the street that's getting interrogated by these church inquisitors. And at least in my experience reading some of these documents, it hasn't been until after the Middle Ages that they started focusing more so on women than just anyone. So that's one thing to keep in mind when we're talking about the fact that, with these witch hunts, like the women have more capability for evil or what have you, is that it's somewhat modern in its basis.
Yeah.
So pretty much we come to the conclusion that it's not always about like being sexual if you're naked, it's more of a display of power. So then it like really boils down to like, do we actually give a shit? It's like women listen to Cannibal Corpse, right? Like they're not like super offended by it. Like the only person that like truly has a problem with it is like your mom. Very upset that there's like naked, mutilated, raped women on your Cannibal Corpse album. Like, so why do we continue to listen to it? Like, why do we not give a shit?
Insofar as marketing is to appeal to the consumer, not just a statement by the producer. I'm interested, like, what images of women do you think would bring more women into the heavy metal fold? Ones that they would appeal to them, and which version? Obviously, some form of power or strength. Have we any good examples?
I don't know. Anyone think of any? I can't think of like metal being specifically marketed to women. It's not the general segment. Although it's not like trying to exclude women specifically.
Marketing is, it depends on sort of like what is the marketing for. So how are bands promoting themselves, female fronted bands, or a band like Newsbrush where the drummer is a woman, or love this band, Bolt Thrower, his bass player is a woman, or Cryosphere's bass player is a woman. I think the presence of women in bands brings out more fans, more women fans. So then the marketing is a little bit different. I don't think that, I'm not a fan of Cannibal Corpse, I'll just admit it. I was when I was younger, but I don't know, this is the... Yeah, no, not the first two albums. When I saw them on the Decibel tour, and I just had to finally, I was done. It was, I was enjoying it until Corpse Grinder said, he was introducing one of the songs, and he said, yeah, did he do the same bit for every show? Maybe he did. Yeah, this is for all you ladies. I want you to scream like you did when I just raped you in the alley. I have pretty thick skin, and I'm a mother, and I've been a metalhead for a very long time. And that was, for me, I was done. I was like, I'd already kind of just, with Cannibal Corpse. I was never not a fan, but I wasn't ever a fan, if that makes sense. And it was that where I finally said, you crossed the line. And so the question, just to kind of segue off that, I think, what is the line, right? So on the one hand, sort of like, how do we get women involved? There are plenty of women heavy metal fans out there. It's interesting to see the swath at different shows, depending on what band it is, too. But where do we draw the line, right? Individually, as part of, as community members, is there like a dominant voice about where the line is drawn? Is that an appropriate comment for him to make? Is it funny? Does it alienate women in the audience? It alienated me, and I am almost embarrassed to say that because of the perception that it's just metal. You love metal. It's just it's just Corpse Grinder doing his thing and whatever. So how does that, am I offended because I'm 44? Or am I offended because it's actually offensive, right? And that people in the audience were cheering, and I was watching women just kind of, just troubling.
If the question is why should we care, then of course there are many angles. You can take one, of course, the one that's been focused on so far is about including and attracting women to the metal scene, and certainly the role of marketing in that has a big role in either pushing women away or into, and certainly I think that comments like that are disturbing on one level because they do, I think, would probably offend and alienate some women, not all, of course, but I think on another level, even if metal were to remain exclusively boys club and there were no women in it, I think it would still be very disturbing and a huge issue, and that kind of comment really disturbs me as well, because as well these sort of representations of women don't just affect women, but they also play a role in the reproduction of culture and how men view women, and also they play when you have images that Scorpions album where the woman is like a dog, what does that say to the male audience, about how they should treat women, right? So I think, as men we should care also because of what is being, how we're being told to, you know, treat women.
Right, and a flip side read on all of this could be a discussion on the crisis of masculinity based completely on what you're saying right now. Absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought that up. Yeah.
I'm gonna, I just wanted to sort of add kind of a quick coda to what was just talked about, because we're seeing kind of two different trends. One trend that is looking at metal and accepting some of the problematic elements of it as kind of permissible space for escapism, as critique of kind of norms of society that is healthy and a good space to have that. But then also, what is the limit? How far do you go before you're actually being more than just kind of a safe space and actually doing things that are harmful to your community and to your behavior? And I think that's a really fine line and a really sort of, I believe that there are limits, and for me as well, Cannibal Corpse is one of those places that I just can't go. And also, you know, explicitly anti-Semitic white power metal is also for me, you know, it's not something that I would find. So, and I think we all, in this room at least, are aware that there are sort of some elements of metal that are beyond just, you know, critiquing society. Anyway, okay, let's go have lunch. We'll meet back with Cascadian Black Metal, which is fun.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes.